Welcome to Austen Mondays. I am your host, Edward G. Pettit from the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for 24 weeks, we have been on a biblio-venture with Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In today's episode, I am joined by all three of our annotation co-hosts to illuminate, elucidate, explicate the final chapter of Pride and Prejudice, and also talk about this whole reading adventure that we've been on for the last 6 months. So please welcome Kathleen Hudson, Casey MacMillan, and Lauren Nixon. Hey guys, well, one of you could be illuminate, one could be elucidate, and one could be explicate. How's that?
I call explicate.
Yeah,
just because it's fun.
I'm not qualified for any of those. Can I have a throw shade option?
Maybe that can be illuminate, because if you illuminate, you're throwing shade on something else. So you be illuminate, Casey. I'll be elucidate.
That's just science.
I love it. Perfect.
Well, thank you guys for all being on this show. And for all of you out there, if you're watching live on YouTube right now, I welcome you to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. If you're watching as a recording, you can do the same thing. Doing that gives our show greater visibility, leads to more people discovering Austen Mondays, because it's not over as it stays online. So people can continue to discover the show as they go on searches for Austen and Pride and Prejudice. A little bit later, we will draw the name of the winner of our final Austen Mondays raffle. This week's prize is a personal tour, a private tour from me for up to 10 people. And it could be either live at the Rosenbach or in person at the Rosenbach or online. And I'll show you the Jane Austen things we have. And, you know, if it's in person, you can hold them in your hand, which is really nice. And that'll be a lot of fun. Well, no turnabout the room, so we're just gonna I'm just gonna kick things off today with what I'm drinking for the final Drinking with Jane and Ed. There it is, Drinking with Jane and Ed. And tonight's drink is well, every week, it's an Austen inspired, drink, and usually it's tied to the chapter that we're reading. But this time I just decided I wanted to have a drink for the Bennet sister who's too often overlooked. This is the Mary Bennet. It is gin, simple syrup, lime juice, and I have this rosemary tincture that was made for me, and shake it over ice, and there's a little sprig of rosemary in there to continue that rosemary. I mean, it's a gimlet with rosemary. You can actually I make it with simple syrup, and then I have the rosemary tincture. Obviously not everybody has a rosemary tincture. You can make simple syrup very easily. It's just equal parts sugar and water. You heat it up and stir it till the sugar dissolves, and then you can throw rosemary in it and leave it steep in there while it's still warm. And you take the rosemary out and you have rosemary flavored simple syrup. And you can also make this a fizz. You could have the Mary Bennet fizz by a little less gin and then add some soda to it. So there we go.
I feel like we're all desperately moving towards warm weather drinks now. Like we're done with winter. we want the warmer weather drinks.
Well, it's officially spring here, so yes. Right? Is today spring?
It doesn't feel like it, yeah, but it is officially spring.
I think tomorrow spring. It's the 21st, isn't it?
I don't know.
Is that the official start of spring? I don't know.
I don't even know.
Are we different in America than the UK? We're different.
I don't know. I don't
you guys
know.
Maybe got snow over there, didn't you?
Oh, heck, did we ever?
All the snow.
As you remember, Kathleen, this country is ill-equipped.
Very ill-equipped with snow. No snow.
Very ill-equipped.
I have to, but before I just drink the rest of the night, I do have to thank the Rosenbach director, Kelsey Bates, who actually gave me this recipe that I adjusted a little bit. And she also made that rosemary tincture that I've had for a couple of years now that I use in drinks. So even the director of the Rosenbach can come out with a cocktail. So
that's
it's a good
amazing.
place to work.
Hey, whatever it takes to give Mary Bennet some fizz.
Yep. Yeah, I should
She
have
just-
it as a fizz. Yes.
Yeah. She needs the fizz.
Yeah.
You know, her reading choices need a little refresh there, you know. Put down the Fordyce sermons, pick up
The
a copy.
Fordyce's sermon would be just a
better.
really cheap, strong,
Yeah.
pungent alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the
Like,
opposite of
grain
fizz?
alcohol.
Fordyce.
That would be
Fordyce versus
something you
fizz.
have to drink. No, like a Fordyce sermon alcohol would be like a castor oil kind of thing, you know.
Oh,
Fordyce
yeah.
sermon would be being hit in the face with a frying pan is what the Fordyce sermon would be. Yes.
Well, I thought Mary needed a fun cocktail to enliven her view of the world. As we see, that kind of happens in a sense at the end of the novel here, and you know, and I also thought, like, you know, while you're at it, just play the piano as long as you want at the party, Mary. Don't let anybody stop you. So
He just wants to dance. She just wants to rock on.
well, let's just get right to the last chapter. It's short and it's a wrap up of everybody, and that will easily lead us into then kind of wrapping up the novel. Afterwards, in the middle today, I'll do the drawing as I usually do. And we're in chapter 61 or whatever the last chapter is, if you're if you're divided into volume numbers in your edition. And basically the novel's over, and this is like, I mean, this is every Dickens novel does this too, where there's an extra chapter, small chapter on the end that kind of wraps up like everybody's fate at the end.
Yeah. I'm not sorry about it though, because again, it's all the sides. If you were only interested in Elizabeth, that would then the penultimate chapter was the end chapter. But
I can't recall. Lauren, Kathleen, you guys might know. I mean, this isn't real. Is this a fixture of 18th century novels? I can't really.
Kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, they do the wrap up thing, which is almost like the scroll at the end of the movie where, you know, how they have the text at the end, which is where everyone ended up. They do want to wrap it up. They don't leave a whole lot of room for sequels.
Yeah, Radcliffe and Burney both do this thing, and Radcliffe literally will kind of be like, the final sentences will be something like, I think one of the novels is literally like, "That which is right," is like one of the final lines, and the last chapter is always this kind of like in Romance of the Forest, it's like Adeline and Theodore lived happy ever after, everything was restored, the law is good and proper, don't kill your brother, peace. And Bernie does
all the
similar
side characters too do get there, you know, and definitely I always found it interesting that, especially for the Radcliffe Gothic novels, the servants get their final. It usually wraps up with, you know, and the servants tell everybody that everything is fine, everything's fixed.
Mm-hmm.
That's often filtered through a side character perspective. You know, as narrators. That like, it has to be like a restoration of equilibrium. Because if you think about like the progression of the novel as a form, you have to have that closing of the story. We're not at a point yet really where sequels are a thing. People are doing them, but mostly just to kind of capitalize or profit. Sarsfielding. But the novel is, you know, we have the multi-volume novel, the serialized novel. So a novel is a single tale. If you're going to tell a follow-up story, you're going to do like Richardson does in Pamela, and you're going to decide to tack an extra volume on the end. You're not going to carry it on. So you have this kind of thing where it's like, you have to project slightly further into the future. You have to say to the reader, equilibrium has been restored. This is the state of things. You need to be able to imagine how this story ends, and then that's it. I mean, if you think back to Jane Eyre, even that novel, you know, a couple of decades later, still does the same thing. So yeah, it is quite a common trope. Austen makes it
Dickens
less
does it
severe.
the entire time. Dickens does it until, you know, well, not the last novel because he didn't finish it, but he always wound up doing that throughout his novels. But he learns from 18th century novels.
Yeah, and for me, these final chapters, which she does in all of the texts, are very much, you can see
the reading influences. It's something I've just been writing. I just sent it off yesterday. I'm doing a little series for the Jane Austen Regency World magazine about the women writers that Austen read. And you don't think about it until you look at like Charlotte Smith, Fanny Burney, all in the same pocket, and you go, oh yeah, they all do this, and then she also does this, and you can see this lovely like literary family tree of like this writer in 1750 and then this writer in 1770, and also kind of Austen in the 1800s and 1810s. But yeah, it's definitely her continuation of that tradition.
Well, I'm so grateful for it, right? Because you put us into 3 volumes of a world, and it feels like that gentle send off of, yes, and you don't even have to worry what happens to, does everyone get their just desserts? They do, you know, you have a sense of the continuation of the things. And she does it in such her characteristic witty way that, you know, I have a sense of course, it was only until you just said it now, Kathleen, that I realized the extent I wish I have missed on knowing what happens to Hill.
Yeah.
The great mystery will be unsolved.
It's interesting too, because we were talking in the last chapters too for last week that, again, Austen specifically thematically is focused on what happens after the happily ever after. You know, that she has these relationships that then project out into the future, and like you see the elder Bennet's disintegrating relationship, and you see all this other, you know, that it's not just Elizabeth marries Darcy. It's very important for her to conceive of relationships as having futurity, and that they continue to develop, and that's really key to Elizabeth and Darcy's relationship, that it will continue past this point. It's not you get married and cut and then fade to black, and that's the end. Although that's when all the movies start. So I do find it very interesting, and I think it's very much in keeping with her focus of, no, this is a relationship. Marriage is great, but stuff happens after that, and we all should be cognizant of it.
It's funny. Oh, sorry, Ed.
No, go ahead. And then I want to start.
Yeah. I was going to say it's funny because often, you know, these are called novels of courtship, or, you know, as Jeffrey Unitas called it, the marriage plot. Like these are courtship novels. And sometimes that was used negatively, like to dismiss particularly very prolific writers like Charlotte Smith, who wrote lots and lots of novels because they needed to. This courtship novel was seen as being, you know, it's for girls and oh yeah, whatever. But what's really fascinating, and Austen's doing this too, is that the key aspect here, like Kathleen said, it's not about courtship. It's about the long term and how you have a good marriage. And what Austen does repeatedly, which she very much takes from the Gothic and the tragic sentimental novel, is to show us relationships that have ended badly or that did not go well. We frequently get, throughout all 6 of Austen's novels, bad marriages. And part of her courtship plot is, how do you navigate this very realistic, you know, this isn't a Gothic novel where it's like, and then he locked her in the basement forever. Yeah. You know, this is a realistic bad marriage. We get equivalents, exactly. We get the real version of what the analogy in the Gothic was trying to tell us. So it's so important to have this chapter at the end that's like, here are the people who were allowed to be part of this happiness. You get a mention of the gardeners. Here are the people who were not. Here is a projection of the future, so that you, the 17-year-old girl reading this novel, applying this wit and this perspective to your own life, don't forget about this bit, because this is what the future is also supposed to look like. And I think that's really key here, that if we think about these as women to women in terms of that kind of author to reader pipeline, I think that's one of the things that's so crucial. And I think that's also what makes them so timelessly readable, because we still want that. We as modern readers don't want it to end with the happily ever after. We need a little bit of reassurance that there's some things that will happen in the future.
Well,
and
as we go through
we'll get there. Sorry, I know we'll get there, but one of the things that struck me this time through reading this last chapter is the extent to which Lizzie and Darcy still grow in grace, in forgiveness of people, whether they deserve it or not, and being philosophical of people, whether they deserve it or not. Like, it just feels like a great tie into so many of the themes we have pulled out in this read this time through.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go that there's no comeuppance in this either. So, you know, people, most of the, like, even the ones that aren't that, like, they're okay where they're at. And there's no like, and this person will be punished forever now because they deserve to be, you know, that doesn't seem
Even
to.
Wickham gets off pretty much.
Well, let's start with the first. I mean, Casey, read just the first sentence.
Okay. Oh, shall I give it a little like color of Mrs. Bennet?
Please, because you know that's where I'm going.
Happy for all her maternal feelings was the day on which Mrs. Bennet got rid of her two most deserving daughters.
Love it.
I mean, the novel begins with what Mrs. Bennet thinks, you know, is a truth universally acknowledged. And the last chapter, you know, we get the first sentence is how she feels, right?
And more of the Austen irony. She got rid of her most deserving daughters.
Yeah.
Her most deserving daughters.
Got rid of, and the most deserving daughters, and it's Austen who like, it's like, if you haven't caught on in the novel of the irony, well, then it's going to seem really mean.
Yeah. And if I hadn't been holding the book, I would have given it a little clap.
Yeah. And I love that immediately after that we have that like infamous switch of Austen to the like authorial first person where she does that really wry
I wish I could say.
Yeah, like I wish I
make
could
a
say.
joke.
Which I love it when she does that.
Yeah. Even before we get that, please don't skip over the deliciousness of the second sentence, which compares visited and talked of. Like, what a meal! What a meal between with what delighted pride she afterwards visited Mrs. Bingley and talked of Mrs. Darcy. I mean, I know how many Christmases she was not invited to Pemberley with that verb change. I freaking love it.
Even we'll see later, even Jane and Bingley get a little too much and they have to move.
Nearly.
And then it's, you know, and then the author comes in. I wish I could say, for the sake of her family, it's a little complicated. I wish I could say, for the sake of her family, that the accomplishment of her earnest desire in the establishment of so many of her children produced so happy an effect as to make her a sensible, amiable, well-informed woman for the rest of her life. Though perhaps it was lucky for her husband, who might not have relished domestic felicity in so unusual a form, that she still was occasionally nervous and invariably silly. That the narrator comes to make a joke that, you know, I wish I could say that she kind of straightened up and was more, you know, not as ridiculous, but she's not.
Yeah, and perhaps this is good for Mr. Bennet too, because he's used to it by now.
This is the relationship that he's used to, and so
he's not exactly, you know, winning a whole lot of prizes himself these days. So
it's that kind of implication that if she wised up and became more sensible, then she wouldn't put up with him either. So that would be the complete.
You wouldn't be half as entertained or get away with half as much as
Austen
he
does this all the time with these couples who are together and shouldn't be together, but if one of them improved, everything would fall apart. So they have to stay together in ridiculousness, because that's the only way for them to.
Thank God they're married to each other so that two more people didn't have to deal with them. Because could you imagine if they inflicted that in two couples as opposed to just the one?
Well, there's one thing that Mr. Bennet doesn't want, it's change. Even if it was for the better, he doesn't want anything to change.
No, you know, and in the spirit of, you know, no one gets comeuppance, but people end up sort of in the sphere they deserve to be in, even if that sphere is mediocrity. Yeah, like he doesn't deserve any better from his wife. She doesn't deserve any better from her husband. They get the spouse they deserve.
And it's kind of still carrying on that tradition of you know, oh, and he was locked up for the rest of his days, or he was so ashamed. You know, you have all of these in
it's
both
not
the
in a gothic
novel,
castle, but it's the same kind of thing. Which
or like
is
at the end of Clarissa, where it's like, oh, you died a sad and insignificant death, sorry, bye. That's not what really happens. Austen transposes all of those traditions. Like, this is still kind of what we expect, but it's just reminding you that, you know, Yeah, Wickham's probably not gonna get chased down and killed in a duel and have this, semi-romantic death in Italy. He's just gonna live a kind of crappy life. And he will get away with it, but there's the implication that he's kind of gonna be miserable because he ultimately did not marry rich, did not get what he wanted.
Yeah. But he gets what he deserves, right? Having to
Exactly.
having to still kind of beg, having to still kind of cheat.
They have to live in Newcastle. No, just kidding. Don't come for me, Geordies.
Well, let's start with, we start with Mr. Bennet, which I think is, and he missed his second daughter exceedingly because we know he's really attached to Lizzie, but he delighted in going to Pemberley, especially when he was least expected, which to me means that every time things get a little noisy with Mrs. Bennet, he just literally leaves.
Yeah, just scoots off.
He doesn't have to retreat into his library now. He's like, I could just go to Pemberley. I own a carriage. And he goes out and gets in his carriage and heads off to Pemberley.
Pemberley has a much nicer library, I would assume.
And nobody will bother him there.
Meanwhile, he could have sent, something by post to say he is coming, and he doesn't.
No, that's the little reminder that he doesn't learn.
He is in fact still Mr. Bennet.
I mean, I know I'm very 21st century, but not only do friends know, don't call me, just text, but also don't you dare show up at my house.
I think
lose my number, lose my
every single
address.
time I read this novel, every time since I was 14, someone turned up unannounced at my house on a regular basis, I would move and not tell them where I lived.
As they would deserve.
We have a good question here, but I want to save it for a little bit. And from Cassandra, who writes, who asks us, what do we make of the fact that there is no mention of any of the couples having children? But just put a pin in it because I want to get that when we talk about the couples and their fate later. Bingley and Jane, well, here's the first of them. Bingley and Jane, they remain at Netherfield only a year, only a 12 months, so near vicinity to her mother and Meryton relations. Could you imagine? And Mrs. Phillips, like every day walking over to Netherfield, was not desirable even to his easy temper or her affectionate heart. And they quick skedaddle, and they're closer to Pemberley, 30 miles, within 30 miles of each other, which I think is an echo of Darcy earlier saying to Elizabeth, like, well, 50 miles, would you?
Good road.
Good road, yeah.
Close, right? And it is close. And 30 miles is even closer. And for rich people, they can see each other as often as they like.
I do like, though, that while we drag, obviously, Mrs. Bennet and the Meryton relations, the next sentence is the darling wish of his sisters was then gratified. Of course, that's the throwback to them wishing to be closer, but them wishing to be closer because Caroline wanted to marry Darcy, so it's the wish, but not the wish. Part of the, again,
well, you got what you asked
Austen
for.
irony. Yeah, I mean, you got it. You got what you wanted.
I missed that line. Thank you for pointing that out. But we can hit that question now before we get to the others. I mean, there's no mention of children here. Can we make anything of that? Or is that just Austen's just giving us this is the start of their marriages, so she's not talking about
I have an opinion on this, but it's quite bleak, so I think I should go last.
I have probably the least informed, so I'll go first. It'll be like stair steps into despair. I mean, is it the Ireland of don't write what you don't know? Is it as simple as that? It can't be. That's why I started.
See, I don't.
She knows that she's seen enough people with children and experience.
Yeah.
She knows what that is, especially in herself. Yeah.
I can't think of too many other Austen novels, if any. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if any of them necessarily end with a list of children. I don't know that's. I mean, I think it might. I never thought very much of it. I guess I just kind of assume. I mean, because not all the novels, again, the Gothic novels either, even the ones that are sort of the happily ever after and have that ending, or like, and then they had this many children and these were their names. That just seems like a separate part, like a separate story almost that they just don't feel the need to include that necessarily. So I guess I just sort of thought it was a choice by her that she didn't want to get into the, and here are all the children and here, then like she almost didn't want to hem herself in that much, but it was enough that that everyone had achieved domestic bliss, and the assumption that there would be children later or not, was just sort of implied.
I can't remember. Did we get a mention already that Charlotte is already?
Charlotte's pregnant.
Yes. Yeah,
Charlotte.
she is.
Yeah,
So
we know
there's
that.
at least
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
mention, which
But
we don't
even
want-
that too, I
we don't
think is
wanna
like
hear.
a one
Ooh,
sentence
Mr. Collins.
thing.
We don't wanna
Yeah.
hear.
And obviously
That
in
part,
Emma,
like, in Amy.
yeah, in Emma we also get children not from the main couples but from other couples.
Right.
And at the end of the Gothic novels you do often get things like, and they would be surrounded by their grandchildren. You don't get like names, numbers, anything like that.
was the depressing thing.
My somewhat depressing thing is that children were not part of the domestic bliss happy ending, because the likelihood of dying in childbirth was very, very high. So, and having studied a lot of Austen's life, multiple of her sisters-in-law died in childbirth. Some after. Two of her brothers had 12 children. Charles and Edward. I think Francis had 9 children. And more so Cassandra, but Jane too. Cassandra would usually go to the sister-in-law for the laying in. So while she was getting ready to give birth, Cassandra would go and look after the house. But there's also that unspoken implication that someone needs to be there if something happens.
In case.
So
Yeah.
And that did happen. So Elizabeth Knight, after her 12th child, passed away. Her eldest daughter, Fanny, I think was only 16. She essentially became the mother of the household. So there's this really kind of like awful unspoken thing that really damages the romance narrative in the happily ever after. And obviously that's not the key thing. That's not fully what Austen is about. But by saying they will have children or children will be in the mix, there's this kind of, it almost breaks the reality. If it's not likely statistically that both Elizabeth and Jane and Lydia and potentially also Kitty will all have children and all survive. Children could be the end of the marital bliss, because pregnancy was such a dangerous game. And obviously, there were plenty of people that had children and survived. Austen's own mother, but there was, we know that there was a lot of stillbirths or a lot of children that died very young, and obviously this is a very heavy topic, so sorry for bringing it down a little bit, people, but this is a very real thing that I do think that Austen is very cognizant of, because she has seen these blissfully happily married couples who she loved as sisters. Her 2 of her brothers were very, very happily married and both lost their wives in childbirth. And I think there is a genuine decision here not to add children to the happy ever after, because there is that negative consequence and possibility. And I think she purposefully chooses not to add that in because it is such a fraught topic. That is my kind of
in her letters too. She does mention a couple times about the kind of like, oh, and whoever is having a baby, and this, and she writes about it as if this is a not like a disaster, but this is a very a fear.
It's a really scary thing to happen to a woman in the 1800s. This was genuinely something that you weren't certain of. Most women would.
I was going to just ask the question. So, right, it sounds to me, right, it's kind of like that Jane Austen doesn't mention war because she doesn't have to, right? Because it's the fabric that we're all reading from. And so, I wonder if this was a question that might not even occur to a reader in.
I think so.
Well, we had another question from Sophie P. out in Davis, California, who's my daughter. She said, was having children a class thing? That did more rich people have kids because they had better medical care and could survive more? I think there's an interesting. I think it's almost the other way around.
I was going to say, I think it's. I mean, because they didn't necessarily get better medical care, when you're wealthy.
Everybody got poor medical care. Everybody got
And in fact,
Especially when it came-
I kind of think it worked against you to have a wealthy doctor on the cutting edge of, I'm going to put leeches on you, as opposed to a lower class midwife who probably knew a lot more than the male doctor.
Especially with childbirth.
Yeah,
because childbirth was a community thing.
Yeah,
you had the midwife, but also, so there's, particularly, for example, when Austen was born, it was snowing. There's that letter about someone walking through the snow, and Mrs. Austen frequently was, the attendant at many, many births, and this, Mrs. Austen was off at such and such's house. So when you were a poorer and in some ways up to about Austen's class level, it was acceptable to call, when someone would run around the village, Mrs. such and such is going into labor, and all the mothers, all the older women would come, and you would have at least the benefit of all of these women who knew because they had been through it. And it was a little bit more acceptable to do things that were considered to be superstition, but actually usually had genuine scientific basis. We just didn't know it at the time. Whereas if you were very wealthy, you didn't have that access to community. It was unlikely that you had anybody with you. You probably wouldn't necessarily have your mother with you. You might not even, depending if you had sisters, and often it would be a younger sister, so it might not even be a sister who's had a baby.
You'd be relying on the servants.
You'd be relying on the servants.
And they would have more common sense than most of the other women involved.
You didn't call a doctor for childbirth. You only called a doctor if you've seen Bridgerton, you only called a doctor if it came to the point where it was, you've got to save one or the other. You've got to make this decision, or this is happening. You only called a doctor if things started to go really wrong. So it's not like, oh, she's gone into labor, let's go and get the doctor. It's something's going wrong. Generally birth was a female dominated space.
Being wealthy gave you access to better food, to better living conditions. But it didn't give you better health care.
No,
we're not at that point,
and often poor families had 14, 15 children, and very, very rich families had 3. Because generally you married because it was a business deal.
Well, is
you
that
had your heir, your spare.
Staying out of bed? Is that?
It's mostly sleeping in separate rooms. Contraception is kind of a thing at this point. We're starting to get contraceptives,
but again, not necessarily among poor populations, less well-educated populations, Catholic populations. I mean, there's you that old chestnut, and it is an old chestnut of working class people having more children, than they can afford to keep. And again, I'm not agreeing with that whole cliche, but there is, that does come from, you have more. If anything, I'd expect larger families on that side of the scale than on the wealthier side. And I also do think it's interesting that, again, in terms of this whole conversation, Austen has such a problematic relationship with motherhood anyway. Like, all of her mothers are so wonky that I do wonder. It's so interesting that you brought up her anxieties about motherhood, because I think that might be, again, feed into why Mrs. Bennet is the way she is, because she's got these mother anxieties.
We also have the Gardners in this novel, and their children, and their many children, and they're a happy couple.
And that does happen.
Leave their children with their relations and go off whenever they
and it is
good to have vacations.
If you think about like Austen's own relations, so her brother Edward, who was adopted by the Knights, he was very wealthy. The reason that they had 12 children is because that was a very happy marriage. They shared a bedroom. Because they wanted to share a bedroom. They would have been richer if they'd not had as many children. They did not need to have that many children. And this is like King George and Queen Charlotte. They loved each other. That was a happy royal marriage. Whereas the Prince Regent had one daughter. He had multiple illegitimate children, but only one princess.
Casey?
I wonder the extent to which do we think this sense of community was something limited to working in lower classes and something that was cut off from gentry and higher classes? Can we trace that reality beyond, beyond childbirth? Are there other ways in which we can see the ways that the upper classes are sort of cut off from community? Does that play out in other ways?
Well, I mean, I think it plays
so.
off even in Austen, which is, what do you say to your neighbors? Obviously, all the servants seem to know everything before the upper classes do. And that's because there are things that you say and things that you don't. I mean, it's the Wickham thing, but it's also the Willoughby thing. It's not that people don't know, it's that they don't share it. And
it's not polite.
and that's how these, again, the men folk know, and they protect other men at the expense of women. The women don't find out until later, and the women only have gossip, and that's their community. But it's limited by the polite society thing, whereas the understanding is that servants don't have that kind of, their limitations are economic. And I do think a lot of this can be Austen's now on the cutting edge of what will become capitalism. And that shift, is going to redefine community very much, but we're still kind of in that feudal state of, this is a hierarchy. You don't intermix, but communication is limited by the hierarchy of it, which is why servants have great narratives, by my book, and why servants have great narratives, and why heroines and their employers are always like, no, don't say it, don't speak. I think a lot of the community stuff is stifled by that, for sure.
And there's so much middle class anxiety because the middle class is growing exponentially,
but still very new.
And they're looking. They're looking up. We want to look at the Bingleys. The Bingleys are middle class. They are merchant family. They're going to buy their way into the aristocracy eventually. But they are middle class. So they are inheriting these behavioral norms in this polite society. And it's actually getting more difficult to say things. Royal court gossip, everybody knew. Middle class, polite society, pump room, it's different. You only have to look at Persuasion. The only reason, I won't spoil what happens, but because I know some people won't have read it, but the only reason that the truth is revealed at the end of Persuasion about one of the characters is because the heroine goes to talk to her lower class friend in the poor area of Bath, and she's the one who reveals the whole thing. If that hadn't have happened, if she, and she's partially lower class because of what's happened, but she's the one that's got that knowledge. And if Anne did not have that connection, if she wasn't a good enough person to maintain a connection with someone who's fallen to the working classes, that information never would have been revealed. It would have ruined everybody. It's that kind of implication that, and Austen is often niggling at this, like this.
Well, I think too, the middle class is so new. Like it really doesn't have what's going to become, by the Victorian era, a real solid identity.
It's new in this set, but it's been growing, since.
It's been growing. But I still think that there's a bit of a, but who are we really anxiety, and this assumption that you have to conform to certain behaviors in order to present class.
It's why the middle class embraces sensibility so much, because sensibility pops up as this really popular. That anyone could have. Sensibility.
It's surprisingly democratic.
And you only have to look at Richardson, who is doing this thing where he's like, actually, and like Clarissa is kind of she's quite middle class, and her being middle class actually makes her more the heroine of sensibility. And Burke literally says aristocratic women are too luxurious, they cannot be beautiful, they cannot be sensible. Middle class women are the pinnacle and peak of beauty and sensibility. So
I agree.
Right. Hold on. I have because one more question came in from Isabel about children, and I want to hit this, and then I want to move. Isabel asked, but wouldn't all of them surviving children, like if they survive the children, be as much part of her style, Austen's style, as having at least nominally successful marriages? So wouldn't them, if they have children?
I still think it kind of does boil back down to Austen, this anxiety about mothers, and whether that comes from her own feeling like she doesn't, that she isn't a mother herself, or her anxiety about women she knows and loves dying in childbirth, or her anxieties about her own family. Wherever this comes from throughout her novels, I think there's a real, she's got some terrible mothers, and she's got some, good aunts, great, very good female relatives, but there's something about the mothers specifically that she seems to have a massive anxiety about, or just doesn't want to talk about them at all, really. They're gone or absent or something. And I do sometimes wonder, now I'm starting to wonder about it. I never really thought about it before, but now I'm starting to wonder if some of that isn't just that as a, exactly, that as an identity, she just doesn't feel like going there, feel comfortable
it's such a
going
fraught
there.
thing. And it's interesting because, it does seem like she bickers with her mother, but Austen's mother was a very intelligent, very rational. People assume Austen's mother was like Mrs. Bennet. Absolutely not at all. She's more.
She doesn't have any great clergymen in her novel either, but clearly her father was like that.
That doesn't surprise me at all, right? As someone who deals in creating fictions, it would be less safe to create a mother close to your own mother, right? It would be more fraught. I think if her father weren't a great clergyman, we'd get fewer bumbling clergymen. It would feel like I know technologically this is a mixed metaphor. It would feel like a third rail, right? Just a thing that was a little too scary to touch.
Sure.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you do, particularly in the later novels, particularly in Persuasion, you get this real tension between the identity of single women and the identity of married women, because single women live longer statistically, but married women arguably live happier. But
it just feels like longer.
Is living a happy, loved married life, like we see that Lizzie and Jane are going to do, is that thing of like, well, to engage, because realistically, to have that physical loving relationship, you're putting yourself, every time that happens, you're putting yourself at risk. And I think that's something that she really struggles with. And I think when you look at what's happening around her when these novels are being written, the nieces and nephews who she adores, she absolutely loves those nieces and nephews, she loves them, but the anxiety that goes with their births, the possibility that this next niece or nephew could also cost you this sister-in-law, and then you have to watch your beloved brother go through heartbreak. Some of her brothers remarried. I don't think Edward ever did. He was devastated by the loss of his wife Elizabeth, and I think for her, watching that, and she also, I think it's important to remember, Cassandra was engaged when they were young women, very, very, very much in love, and her fiance died abroad of, I think, yellow fever, trying to make enough money to come back and marry Cassandra, and Cassandra just never recovered from that. She never ever got over it. And I think Austen just has this continuous realization when it comes to these matches, because it's not just, oh, this person fancies this person, it's this person enhances and illuminates this person, and there's this this sadness, this kind of threat in the background. And I think it does really color. I think, yes, in a perfect world, she would want children to be part of that happy, successful matrimony, but I think she's just so hyper conscious of the fact that actually that could be the end of a happy matrimony in these two people that she's lovingly created.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad we went down this route. Thank you, Laura. I mean, this becomes something that we didn't get to hit during.
Yeah. Sorry to make it really dark.
No, that's okay. Well, I want to take a break.
Life.
Yeah, right.
We're going to take a little break right now and
drink.
Well, because I have someone waiting to come on. But let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Austen lovers worldwide. If you'd like to donate to the Rosenbach or become a member, you can do so at our website. At the end of the show, I'll give a shout out to all who have donated since our last show. But now I want to move on to our last Austen Mondays raffle and bring on my daughter Lulu to draw the name from the hat, but she's bringing in a guest who has never appeared on the show, and her name is Jane Paulston.
Look
And we
at
have
that
yet
fluffy.
to have Jane on the show because she doesn't care about, unlike the boy, she doesn't really care about this kind of thing. But she's being very patient right now and letting us carry her in here and do this. So Jane, you could say hi, right?
Oh, she's
you
beautiful.
two.
Aw,
Fordy in the
Will
tabby.
you let me go, please?
Yeah,
Did you bring up your
yeah.
treats?
release me.
Lulu brought her treats up the stairs so she would follow her up.
Yeah, she would have been so angry if I carried her all the way.
Well, the raffle right now is your contributions to this raffle help us create more programs like Austen Mondays and like Sherlock Mondays, which will debut in September 2023. And to draw the name, Lulu will do that for this raffle. And I'm using my deer stalker. So there we go.
Okay, what's it gonna be?
And the prize again is a personal tour of the Rosenbach's Austen holdings by me. And the winner and 9 of the winner's friends can either come to the Rosenbach for this, or we can do it online. And that winner is Mara Pearsall. Mara, congratulations, you have won. And you can, we'll contact you, and then we'll arrange a time where you can either come to the Rosenbach and I'll do a tour. I'll show you the Austen stuff, some things related to other authors that you read, like Richardson and Burney we have in our collections as well. Or we could do it online, and I could share images of those and talk to you and your friends about all this stuff. So it'll be a lot of fun. So Mara Pearsall, congratulations. Lulu has, let me get you more in the shot here. And I'll sit back so I don't look so giant next to you.
I'm in a really short chair. I'm not that small.
Lulu's been reading Austen herself and has read a few of the novels. You still have Persuasion and Northanger to go. Oh, and Mansfield Park, but that's probably for the end. But you've read at least since Pride and Prejudice, Emma.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite? Putting her on the spot, right?
Yeah.
Tell me.
I read Pride and Prejudice the fastest, but probably Emma is my favorite. I read that one. Yeah.
I remember her reading it, and that was one of those things where I got to, when she reads books, I get to live, because she doesn't, no, Emma, you had never seen?
I'd never seen Emma.
She'd never seen a version of it.
Oh, but I'd
so
seen Clueless. So I knew
Yes!
that ended up with Mr. Knightley because I'd seen Clueless, and that's Paul Rudd.
There you go. So she
Oh
knew.
my God.
Same age as he was then.
Yeah, hasn't aged a day, really.
You still had conversations during that where, or maybe was that more sense when you were like, you didn't know what was going on, and I was like, he's going to marry Lucy Steele. That's what's going to happen.
I'd seen like the play version of it, but I forgot everything that happened.
She hadn't seen the
what
movie yet.
or what.
So we got to do all that with her. So that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Very
The
cool.
most recent Emma movie was also awesome. I thought that was a great, really funny film.
So what but tell me something about Pride and Prejudice. How do you feel about that one?
Well, for me, it was really easy to read because I feel like it's super accessible for like a modern reader, because like it feels very fast paced. Like for Sense and Sensibility, that one was really difficult for me to read, and I had to like keep coming back to it. It took me months because it's very slow in my opinion. Like it feels like, then they go here and then some things kind of happen there. But with like Pride and Prejudice, it's like everything's kind of happening in succession.
It feels snappier, isn't it?
Yeah, and it feels almost like the structure of like more like modern romance novel. So like almost like template for it. So yeah, for me it feels like very easy to read.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
that's
Lulu,
my opinion.
Thank you for contributing. Thank you for making the credits that we all see in the beginning and the end of the show.
Thank you, Lulu.
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully she'll still be home long enough to make my Sherlock credits.
Yeah, and I want to know what you think when you read Northanger Abbey.
Yes.
I wanted to read it. Well, I wanted to do Persuasion next. I'm trying to get her to do that one. So
Persuasion.
I've been encouraging her to
Beautiful.
read Persuasion next. So.
Goodbye.
Bye, Lulu.
Bye.
Thank you. I mean,
All right.
speaking of Persuasion, Kathleen, you mentioned we don't get a list of all the children at the end of the novel, but At Persuasion, we get a list of all the children at the beginning.
That's true. That's true. Well, that too, you know, in a way, Austen's circumventing the entire thing by making it not about inheritance, isn't she? She's like, you know, we're starting with a list of this family and who inherits what, but we're not ending with that.
Oh, don't, because then Kathleen knows this because she proofread the chapter, I think, for me, but I have a very sad theory about what happens at the end of Persuasion.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well,
We'll have to come back for a bonus Persuasion episode.
Takes place before the Napoleonic War ends, you guys. It's during the break.
We don't talk about the war.
Yikes.
No one expects the Napoleonic War.
Read that last chapter back. I was not happy with myself when I went.
No, I wasn't happy with you either. And you're right, I did proof that chapter.
Austen doesn't have a villain except for Dr. Lauren Nixon. She is the overarching villain.
The problem.
Dr. Lauren Nixon and Napoleon. Those are the villains of
Equally.
Austen. Yeah. Equally. You're on par with Bonaparte.
Well, let me thank everyone first, then that we did the raffle. Let me thank everyone who has donated to the Rosenbeck by buying these raffle tickets. And we have raised, I'm trying to pull up the numbers now. We raised another $1,770 through the raffle, which is really great to do. So thank you everybody who bought tickets for that. Really, you know, the support that we've had on this show and donations every week and people joining as members from literally all over the world as well has been really great. And it lets me create more shows. I have Pickwick Mondays, which will start very soon. As a matter of fact, you know, less than a week from now on March 25th, when each episode I talk about a serial part of Charles Dickens's, who's been hanging over us for every show. Pickwick, first serial novel, because a novel and a serial novel are a little bit different. And we talk about it just as the original readers, 2-3 chapters a month with a rotating set of co-hosts. That'll be a lot of fun. That will stream live on Saturdays, once a month, usually the third or fourth Saturday, and you can find the schedule on the webpage to register. But it'll be once a month, and for the next 20 months, I'll be talking about Pickwick Papers. And our new weekly Biblioventure series, it'll be Sherlock Mondays, which will focus on Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories, and we're going to start with Study in Scarlet and Sign of Four, which are 2 novellas. We'll divide those up into a couple weeks each, and then we'll hit a story a week until The Empty House. And it's about half the canon of Sherlock Holmes stories. But we'll finish with Empty House because that's the manuscript that we have at the Rosenbeck, which is really great to have that manuscript in Conan Doyle's immaculate penmanship that anybody could read. He knew how to make a fair copy for the printer.
That's a rare skill.
Yeah, he really did. And he's a doctor, right? So he still had great penmanship, but he knew how to make a great fair copy.
That's what psychopathy, maybe.
So.
I mean, he was also really into spiritualism, so maybe it was just to make sure the ghosts could read what he wrote. That's it.
So,
but we'll do 27 stories in 30 weeks, and that'll start in September. And the co-hosts, I have 3 co-hosts lined up right now. One of them is Anastasia Klimchinskaya, who is one of the co-hosts on Sundays with Frankenstein, who is absolutely wonderful, and a couple other Sherlockians so far, Mary Alcaro and Monica Schmidt. I'm just about to put the third co-host on, but there's a Facebook group for that as well that people can, and I'm so excited. It's not just what the Rosenbeck has. I have a bigger Sherlock library here at home than Austen, than maybe Dracula, definitely bigger than Frankenstein. So and bigger than Jane Eyre and the Bronte. So of the shows that I've done, I probably have more Sherlock books in. I'm gonna have my own Deerstalker. So that's
pipe.
So I'm very excited to do that. I can't wait for Sherlock Mondays in the fall. Let us jump back to this final chapter. And after Jane and Bingley, now we get to Kitty, and I love what happens to Kitty here, and that it's Casey, why don't you read? You read better than I do.
Oh, sure. The whole paragraph, or just
just read the whole paragraph.
Kitty. Oh, why am I doing an accent in front of Lauren Nixon? Rude. Okay. Kitty, to her very material advantage, spent the chief of her time with her two elder sisters. In society so superior to what she had generally known, her improvement was great. She was not of so ungovernable a temper as Lydia, and, removed from the influence of Lydia's example, she became, by proper attention and management, less irritable, less ignorant, and less insipid. Not of any of those things, just
No,
Just less.
Yeah.
I
I think your
love
British
this
accent's
bit.
better than Lauren myself.
Well, there
So,
you
you
go.
know.
Yeah.
You don't
Excuse
sound
me,
British.
That's classist.
That is.
Okay. That is an insult to my
That would be awful if it was me too doing it. That's bad. The class scholar being
Yeah.
classist.
I
How
do.
dare
Laura
you.
knows this. I do love how Americans love any British accent. They think it could be like,
hello.
Yeah, Cockney.
No matter what,
I
they think
have-
it's so regal sounding.
And I have like my accent's from the one place in the UK that apparently is just, you can't mimic it. And I don't even really have it anymore because I ended up with a British University Standard accent because I went to Bath and everybody laughed at me for 3 years because I said daft instead of daft.
Yeah.
You adapted.
Wait,
could
can
be
you
like-
take us back there? Can you take us back to can you put yourself in that deeper group of the record of the voice you grew up in? Can you give us a taste?
Can you?
So so I would say to you guys, I'm from Nottingham, but you say Nottingham, from Nottingham, and go uptown on bus.
Well, no, we say
Uh,
Nottingham is what we
Nottingham.
say,
Nottingham.
but you
Go
would
not-
say
go uptown on bus.
Yeah.
It's
Brits
very
love
it's very
condensing
it's-
syllables.
It's flat vowels, so you don't intonate any of the vowels. So my parents are from a town called Ilkeston. You call it Ilson.
Ilson.
Uh,
Well, my favorite
and
is
it's like, yeah,
my favorite is Chumley, which is spelled
Chumley.
Cholmondeley.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's Chumley.
Chumley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like there's a place near here called Southwell. It's Southall, Chilwell, Bulwell. Like you say very very flat.
Well,
You don't enunciate anything. It's great.
All right. Kitty
he
is
improves.
Kitty
It
is
improves.
removed from Lydia and really removed from her mother. Improves, and she they keep her away from Lydia, and even though Mrs. Wickham invites her all the time to come and stay with her, that doesn't happen. And Lydia,
And her father stays true to he'd never consent to her going. He laid down the law and he's sticking to it.
I-
review at the end of it. It's not in there.
I love how other writers go on chapters long, in-depth explorations of the Rousseauvian idea of nurture and removing someone to the countryside. And Austen, in about 2 sentences, just nails it. He's like, yeah, Kitty, we took Kitty away and we put her here and she's better now.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And she's not perfect. Like Casey said,
perfect.
she's less bad.
Yeah.
yes.
But
I
she's
love
it's definitely an improvement.
Yeah.
Because
it is a very firm Austen saying, nature versus
basically has the
nurture.
short-term memory of a goldfish. And here we are.
There's definitely advantages to be said for like positive society, blah, blah, blah. Other writers would write massive long treatises and she's just like, oh yeah, Kitty's better now. Turns out, better environment, better
not
girl.
of so ungovernable a temper as Lydia. So
But
Lydia's
the
the lost cause, right?
Yeah.
Lydia's,
Mhm.
as we'll see.
Too far gone,
She's
too
just
spoiled, too indulged.
But I think it's too interesting, again, that the next paragraph is Mary, who's the flip side, which is she's too repressed, but now she's better. Yeah.
the only daughter who remained at home and was necessarily drawn from the pursuit of accomplishments by Mrs. Bennet's being quite unable to sit alone. So Mary can't just sit there and practice her piano and read her books and do that thing.
Be accomplished,
that's
but
the thing that she was doing before that wasn't helping her. And now that she's able to go out and mix in the world, because Mrs. Bennet's got to take somebody out because Kitty's constantly being taken off to, the other sisters' homes. So she has to take Mary around with her. And then, but it is the, because Mary was obliged to mix more with the world, as she was no longer mortified by comparisons between her sister's beauty and her own, it was suspected by her father. This is an interesting way to put it. It was suspected by her father that she submitted to the change without much reluctance.
But she'd never admit to it. But
Mr. Bennet notices that, which I think is more like Mr. Bennet notices that she has improved and that she is better off.
A little bit of growth on Mr. Bennet's part too, right?
Yeah.
There's a sense of, and he was less terrible to her in public. It feels like,
well, it's kind of like he only has one daughter to pay attention to now, so maybe he's naturally going to be a bit better to her.
Well, it's interesting because part of the reason why Lydia ended up where she ended up was because he wasn't paying attention. He just wanted it set. So you hope he's learned a slight lesson here, which is even if they're not your favorite daughter, you do still need to pay enough attention to them to see where they're going with this.
It's kind of like the pantomime version of what happens to Fanny Price in Mansfield Park. When the Bertram sisters, leave the house, when Mariah gets married, and Fanny is the only daughter, so to speak, of the house, and they start paying attention to her, she starts socializing, she blooms into this like lovely human being with that they want to be around. And obviously it's a very different situation, but that's why I said like this is like the pantomime of that. She still blooms with these neglectful, reluctant guardians. But in the same way you do kind of get that impression that it's that thing of like when you give a child attention and you
they'll do better.
Invest in a child, they'll do better.
I'm gonna run out of booze. I'm drunk on all the pre-mix of this that I've made. So when I have all of you to talk, I have less time. I have more time to drink, right? So
That's blaming us for his drunkenness.
That's great. Yes, I'll blame you for getting toast on the final.
It's gonna be the Mary Bennet that kills us. That's hilarious.
This is a good drink. I really have to thank Kelsey Bates. I needed this drink at the end, this kind of gimlet with roach, just enough that like there's like that. Well, and it's more because it had the fresh rosemary in it, so that aroma really comes up as I'm drinking it. All right.
Let's drag Wickham.
Yeah, now we get Wickham.
Drag him.
Wickham and Lydia. Their characters suffered no revolution from the marriage sisters. They keep Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth must now become acquainted with whatever his ingratitude and falsehood had before been unknown to her. This is what Wickham thinks, and in spite of everything, was not wholly without hope that Darcy might yet be prevailed on to make his fortune. Like Wickham's thinking that, like, well, they're married and she liked me. She thought I was a nice guy. So maybe she'll eventually, but that's not going to happen.
He's got the audacity with the capital A. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
I think he also kind of thinks because Darcy tracked them down and married them, I think he misunderstands why Darcy did what he did. Because really, on a selfish level, it's to save Elizabeth's reputation so that he can still marry Elizabeth. Obviously, he's not expecting her to marry him just because he's done that, but he knows that she's starting to get to be affectionate for him. If they have any chance of being together, he needs to save her reputation. And even if she doesn't want to be with him, that's the last thing that he could do for her. Wickham, I don't think, because Wickham does not understand genuine affection for people. It doesn't occur to him.
It's all transactional. Yeah.
It doesn't occur to him that they're not going to take pity on Lydia now they've saved her. That they're not going to be like, oh yeah, we better give her more money and we better do these things. We better buy them a house. Reputation was the thing that mattered there because
harmed the rest of the family.
Mhm.
That's the only reason Darcy does what he does, because on a selfish level, it means he can still marry Lizzie. On a romantic level, it's one thing that he can do for her to stop her from, sinking into this, terrible fate of having this sister who's eloped. They couldn't care less, but Wickham is so materialistic and so manipulative, and it's that classic not as smart as he thinks he is, that he doesn't understand the motivation for those actions and thinks that actually he might still be able to get some money out of them.
It's funny because the thing that really pinged for me this latest read is that the first thing Darcy does is tries to convince Lydia to leave Wickham. And that feels like an act of incredible generosity beyond reputation. And for a moment, I get a whisper of like, oh, wait, has Wickham learned something? Because for me, I want to give him a bit of credit to say that he recognizes for a hot sec his ingratitude and falsehood. Like there are so many people who are victims of themselves that never can recognize the ingratitude and falsehood in themselves. Like he could just cling to the idea that he is the victim in all this. And just when I start to give him credit of like, oh, if he has to bear with philosophy, that means he knows he's the terrible person. Until that little reversal still in the same sentence, was not wholly without hope that Darcy might yet be prevailed on to make his fortune. And when it becomes very clear, like, he understands nothing ultimately.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that too, because I think Lydia almost gets there too, which is she does ask, but the letter I think ends on an interesting note, which we'll get to.
Lauren, do you have your book? You want to read Lydia's little letter there?
Yeah.
Yep. My dear Lizzie, I wish you joy. If you love Mr. Darcy half as well as I do, my dear Wickham, you must be very happy. It is a great comfort to have you so rich, and when you have nothing else to do, I hope you will think of us. I am sure Wickham would like a place at court very much, and I do not think we shall have quite enough money to live upon without some help. Any place would do, of about 300 or 400 a year, but however, do not speak to Mr. Darcy about it if you had rather not.
If you would rather not. And then the next line, as it happened that Elizabeth had much rather not.
So she didn't. Yes.
Buy me a house,
I just
please.
found that interesting.
And Elizabeth's like, yeah, I'm not buying you a house.
Yeah,
so.
No, but I do find that an interesting kind of addition by Lydia. That's not, and I expect this, and you're my sister, so you should, but it's, and I'm sure part of it is that she's somewhat intimidated by Mr. Darcy.
No, I don't know.
Doesn't want to,
She definitely wants her to give them like.
Oh yes. No, I'm not saying that she doesn't, but it just seemed like an interesting thing to tack on at the end, that she's hedging a little bit. That again, it's like Wickham recognizing his ingratitude and falsehood. Not that it makes them good people, but maybe it makes them a little bit less awful. That it's not like she's being like, and I demand it because you owe me. It's I demand it, but if you don't want to talk to your husband about it,
well, I think that's strategy. She's fully expecting. She fully wants Elizabeth to go talk.
Yeah, because what Lizzie does do is send her own personal
money. Yeah.
It just enrages me. But yeah, I mean, your tax, if you're going to continue to be effective in manipulating people as you get older and less cute, you better change those tactics. So it could just be as little as them realizing the tactics that work for them now is a little bit of difference, gets them somewhere. When they were younger,
although the thing about finding Wickham a place at court, the more I get into like my research and realize about court and things like that, gets funnier and funnier and funnier because Darcy's not at court as far as we know. He doesn't have a position. And soldiers, often soldiers were the high-ranking aristocratic soldiers were sometimes given roles at court, but being like having a role at court, you usually had to be invited. Like Fanny Burney was keeper of the robes for Queen Charlotte, because everyone was so delighted by Burney's writing, and because she was in a famous social circle, like
you actually have to have a skill, like some kind of,
like
or be rich, like
or be
rich,
yeah. But you have to. There's a system here.
Yeah, but Lydia thinking, it's just so funny because it's like, one, Darcy's rich and he's well respected, but he's not in that social circle. and also getting a job at like the whole ridiculousness of that statement, like that is even more out there and
Bizarre,
insane
And
than the
that's
whole like,
Lydia's-
can we have a house?
Yeah, Lydia doesn't understand just the way the
Mm-mm.
world works, period.
It just
and doesn't
shows
want
you.
to.
Yeah, it shows
Very,
you
very-
how.
Yeah. No, she clearly hasn't bothered. Like, wait, what's above lieutenant again? Like, some
Someone
soldiers,
court,
some
right?
soldiers end up at court. Yeah, why not
Yeah.
her?
King of
Well,
England.
Yeah, exactly.
Elizabeth and Jane help her out. They send her occasionally, they send her money. And then Lydia's constantly coming to stay with them. Well, they're also moving constantly from house to house, Lydia and Wickham. They don't have enough money. Their creditors are pursuing them. They're always spending more than they actually have. And I love that, you know, Lydia also stays so long with her sisters that even Bingley has
Even
to talk
Bingley.
to her.
How
He says,
hard do you have to work?
leave. You have to
Mhm.
leave, Lydia. You've been here too long.
They were serving her the cold ham for weeks before she got the message.
He proceeds
this
so far as to talk of giving them a hint to be gone. That's
this is
bad.
The worst
Yeah.
part of Lydia's, you know, of life now is that, you know, Wickham's affection for her soon sunk into indifference. Hers lasted a little longer, which also means she did become indifferent to him because obviously he's abandoning her all the time. But she also retained all the claims to reputation her marriage had given her.
Another double-sided thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
like, she has a which means she has a worthless reputation,
Yeah.
right? So nobody's
Mhm.
still taking her into
But
account.
assumes that she has a fairly good
Yeah.
one. You know?
Yeah.
And it kind of pokes that thing again of like, for Lydia, scandal, a reputation of scandal is as worthy as a good reputation because
Yeah.
she wants to be talked of.
Any
She
attention's
wants
good
to
attention.
be-
Mhm.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing of like, and I think she still has that perspective that, and you get this in the letter, you know, oh, you know, as I love my Wickham, like he was the catch. So for her little small town girl brain, she's still bagged the guy that everybody wanted.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you see people that got married after you finished school and he's now like, you know, a terrible degenerate human being, but she is still like, I got the school high, I got the guy that everybody wanted, and everyone else is like, yeah, okay, cool.
But that even goes
Keep
away
him.
for her. That even will
Yeah.
go away for her, which is a shame. So that's
Well, it's partly what feels so modern about this novel. As I was reading an article just this week, and I promise not to get political, but I was reading an article just this week about how we live in a post-shame era, right? That infamy to work through just the public humiliations of being caught out in lies, that if you can weather it, you can come to the other side and retain a kind of popularity of infamy. And it's disgusting.
Yeah.
But
Well, look at people like
It's like-
Anna Delvey and Caroline Calloway. Like, we have these celebrity figures, don't we, who are famous because they're scammers and liars, and that
Yeah.
was still very true in Austen's day.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the early celebrities were people who
Or
had
infamous.
pretended to be people, had scammed, or had done, you know, all these terrible, shameful things. You've only got to look at the people like the Marquis de Sade, people like Byron, people like Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, you know, these people who had been caught in scandal, they were the ones that everybody talked about.
But Byron was more famous. Byron was famous first. He was famous for being a great
Yes.
poet, and then all the bad stuff, and then but that kind of fuels his.
Yes.
Byron
yeah.
leaned heavily into that. Yeah.
Byron
Byron-
said, I'm going to run with this.
Byron's a class of his own here.
We even get in this chapter about Caroline Bingley,
The return of Caroline.
who,
Very deeply mortified.
even though was very deeply mortified by Darcy's marriage,
Pragmatic.
as she
Yeah.
thought it advisable to retain the right of visiting Pemberley, she dropped all her resentment and was fonder than ever of George. I love Austen. Like you could read that, you know, snark there. Was fonder than ever of Georgiana, almost as attentive to Darcy as heretofore, and paid off every arrear of civility to Elizabeth. That as long as she can keep going there, and as Bingley's sister, she gets the invite when Bingley gets to go. But that's her life now, is just being nice to people who don't want anything to do with her.
Take the runner-up prize, I guess.
Yeah, and it
That's
seems
the karma.
miserable. It seems miserable, actually. And I'm happy for it.
Yeah, I can't help but look at it through Lizzie's eyes too. Of we've all seen how attentive she's been to Darcy throughout this novel. If a single woman were that attentive to my husband, I wouldn't like it. Even if I know he couldn't stand her, I wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
Nope.
So again, it's that kind of thing again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's Austen again poking fun at the situation and it would be so rude of them to never invite Caroline, because Caroline is single. So they cannot have Bingley come without her, because she's not quite yet spinster status. So, to be respectable, she goes where her brother goes. Yeah, she will be, it's assumed.
Well,
or she's with her sister.
Yeah, well, because I think that the way she's approached the marriage market is going to make her a spinster, and that she just went all in for Darcy instead of making other connections and doing other things. So
Rookie mistake. Yeah. Rookie mistake.
Hedge your bets, ladies.
Yes.
Visiting Pemberley isn't going to get her
multiple seeds.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Like, she's playing the middle class game, and Austen has respect for the middle class hustle. She is not, as much as she pokes fun, she doesn't actually really have any issue with people who are like, okay, I have to get married. Here are my options. I've got to play the best game I possibly can. Her issue is when people are arrogant, when people, when you've got characters like Isabella Thorpe and Caroline Bingley, like that's when she has an issue with people who are arrogant, people who, don't play the game the way that, it's almost like they're not playing a fair game. Like Caroline does not play a fair game. They're all in the game of marriage, and she plays an underhanded, like, cheating game. So she doesn't get like a good outcome because she played a bad game. She didn't play fairly.
She sucks at it too. Like
she's bad at it.
Every time she went to Darcy with like trying to make a cutting remark, it just came to backfire on her. She could never read Darcy.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, well, actually you are, you're an up and comer, you're part of this middle class, your brother's probably going to buy an estate, you've got a decent amount of fortune. If you'd been sensible, if you'd have, spent your time we know they're in London for a while, she probably could have made a really good match with someone that she didn't completely abhor. But instead, she lumped all her eggs in one £10,000 a year basket.
Georgiana winds up really well here, that Pemberley was now Georgiana's home, and the attachment of the sisters was exactly what Darcy had hoped to see, that Georgiana and Elizabeth become sisters and really behave that way. And it's nice also knowing that Lizzie is not is even though she's separated from Jane, that she winds up with another sister,
yes,
to be close with. And Elizabeth's instructions to her about, like, Elizabeth teasing Darcy and Georgiana being like, well, you can't do that. And she does. And then we get this idea too, like right in the third paragraph from the end of this novel, Austen's talking about how, it's not all about this kind of all in reverence and subservience to your spouse. And that's the lesson that she's teaching Georgiana at the very end of this novel. And I like that's there.
And I think you mentioned in passing too, again, that they're still evolving as a couple. We kind of skipped the part, but that Darcy won't accept Wickham at Pemberley, but for Elizabeth's sake, he is helping him a bit. And I think that connects with the Georgiana stuff, which is they are still growing. The relationship is changing. They're both being better. Darcy is the better for being teased a bit. And Georgiana and Darcy's relationship will be better for having Elizabeth there to tease and to break that down. And that again, it's the wonderful futurity of the Austen, the penultimate and last Austen chapters, which is we're still going, we're still getting better. This is a good relationship because they are helping each other become their best version of themselves, and that's so cool.
Is it also
that's
a
why they're
reinforcement?
romantic.
Yeah. Is it also a reinforcement? Here's the negative side. Is it also a reinforcement of that Darcy is the good, paternal, landlord?
Oh yeah.
Like he
mean,
helps people.
There's a strong argument in all Austen novels for husbandry as the ideal form of masculinity. Mr. Knightley is a classic example of this, and we see it in action because he has one of the characters is one of his farmers. And there's whole plot lines in that novel in Emma about Mr. Knightley being a good landowner because he's investing in agricultural science, and he educates his farmers, and he is doing all of these things. So, and I think, we have to go back to the whole, she sees Pemberley. She doesn't see Pemberley and go, oh my God, this guy is rich. That's part of it.
Yeah.
The other half of it though is
it's well managed.
Yeah, his servants love him. Everything's well kept. He's raised his sister well. There's this thing about, the ideal man is a man who takes care of things.
Yeah.
And I do still think that it's a heavily problematic archetype.
But when you
compare it,
especially the taking care of Wickham thing again, because I feel like it's more of here's toxic masculinity, and we're still now using masculinity to protect it, which is kind of again what happens at the end of Sense and Sensibility, which is Willoughby. It's all covered up.
Everything's covered up. But she kind of is doing this thing where she's like, okay, well, if the alternatives are hyper chivalrous men, that's not sustainable. It's often fake, or very toxic, rakish, charming men. They're the two big archetypes of the period, or overly sentimental men who can't do much. The man who is the husbandry, the gentleman, the true gentleman, that's the man. And it's almost kind of doing that thing where she's like, none of this is perfect, but you have to pick one. And you have to pick one, pick this one.
Yeah. And I think too, she softens it by making it, he's doing this for Wickham for Elizabeth's sake. And he's a good brother to Georgiana, but he's a better brother because he's being teased by Elizabeth. So it's it's that extreme, but see how if you're in a good relationship with a good person, a good partner, those rough edges are softened, and even the things that are kind of problematic are better.
And it takes the more extreme patriarchal edge off husbandry that some
well, it makes it a joint activity, really.
Yeah, because it reinforces that educational belief that to create a gentleman, you had to socialize with women, which made some people super duper anxious because maybe they would become fops, but also maybe they would be gay and fops at the same time, because they spent too much time with women, which always makes me absolutely cry laughing when I read that stuff. But it's kind of reinforcing that notion that you have to have the presence of women, that women's insight, women's perspective, women's influence is extremely important, and does kind of temper that patriarchal element here. And I think this is where, Austen's not a feminist writer because this is 1812, 1813, but there are strong feminist narratives in these novels.
And maybe this is by virtue of the fact that I'm a generation, or half generation than older than you, Lauren and Kathleen, is that I don't even necessarily see that version of masculinity as problematic. The motorbike outside my window, I do. But there is, for me, I read that as allyship, of so long as toxic masculinity exists, we are in a world where allyship is necessary to do some of that work, because there are men who would never listen to what a woman has to say, but the man who lives in protection of those he loves and seeks a partner and is fair is really necessary. I hear what you're saying, but I'm also like, but we need them.
Yeah. Well, it's true, I think the thing too is, and to jump ahead slightly to Lady Catherine de Bourgh, that she's that kind of toxic masculinity, though, which is the empty husbandry. It's the we can't pollute these shades here, that kind of thing, which seemed to be more what Darcy's vibe was at the beginning, but that has been tempered slightly.
Let's move to her then, because Lady Catherine was extremely indignant in the marriage of her nephew, and as she gave way to all the genuine frankness of her character. Did you guys know that Lady Catherine's character has ever been celebrated for its sincerity and frankness? Apparently,
I've heard that. Mostly
that's because she said it. That's because she said it.
That's news to me.
That is the celebrity that she said it. But she finally condescends to visit them at Pemberley
after an estrangement, which again I think is kind of slightly alarming. Language so very abusive that all intercourse was that. I mean, that's I think you'd have to push pretty hard. I would love to see that letter.
At length, Elizabeth's persuasion, Darcy was prevailed to overlook the offense and seek a reconciliation. And it's Elizabeth doing the whole forgiveness thing here and influencing him to be a better person, even though she's horrible. You should forgive her. And then,
well, this is kind of Austen's thing, and I guess this goes back to what we were just saying about like this form of masculinity. On a broader idealistic scale, it's problematic, but Austen's whole thing is that this is the system we live in, and she's not aware. She's not Mary Wollstonecraft. She is not going, how do we break this? How do we change this? Austen's whole thing is, Austen's whole thing is, this is what we live in. And I would love, you get this little bits of Austen where she's like, I want this to change in the future. But for things to change in the future, you must start at this level. And that's like, you know, you need allyship if you are going to have a revolution, if you're going to break the mold, if you're going to do these things. And I think that's what Elizabeth is acknowledging here. And that's massive growth for Elizabeth as well. But Elizabeth supporting her sister and Wickham, Elizabeth saying, no, you should reconcile with Lady Catherine. It's Lizzie coming to this maturity that she's sharing with Austen, the writer, of this is the structure that we are a part of. And to bring change for the future, we must navigate the system as positively as possible, have this positive impact on the people around us, so that hopefully things will change in the future. And I think that's what Austen is always doing, is it's like, you do have to speak a certain way. Like, don't be completely sold to the system. But if you don't acknowledge the system, you will just fail. Nothing will change. You'll either be an outcast or a laughingstock.
And there's always that, how do we make things better?
And I think it works so great as a metaphor too, because now she's in Pemberley. She saw Pemberley. She recognized the potential of Pemberley. She got to know Darcy through Pemberley, and now she's at Pemberley and she's deciding who is received and who isn't. She's reshaping Georgiana's time there, and Lady Catherine comes in part out of curiosity to see how his wife conducted himself in Pemberley, and and she is. I love what she said about she's really coming into mature. She's coming into her own. She saw Pemberley and she fit there, and now she's really growing into that role of.
And you've got that doubling of Georgiana and Kitty. You've got these two girls of not dissimilar ages who have both had negative experiences during their formative teenage years, who are now inhabiting this space with this couple who are maturing and growing and opening Pemberley up to be a more like progressive space. And both Kitty and Georgiana are experiencing this benefit. These two girls who in some ways are very similar. They're both kind of shy, they're both easily led, and you have this kind of implication that Kitty and Georgiana are going to be companions because they're similar ages. They are the younger sisters of this married couple, and they're both benefiting from this beautiful marriage of very matched personalities who are going to be like, actually, Pemberley is not just for this very elite group of people. it's not just this.
Yeah.
It's not just this.
And I imagine, I mean, partly because as readers, we've been convinced of the fact of Elizabeth's, abilities all throughout this novel, but Austen doesn't give us the end game for Lady Catherine. She just says that she decides to go there. But it is very, very easy to imagine her being convinced that Elizabeth is a really, worthy person to marry Darcy in the end. And I especially because Lady Catherine is on her own, she is a powerful woman without a husband.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine her, honestly, like, even knowing her personality, I can imagine her like Elizabeth becomes her favorite one day, and that she winds up talking about her to other people because of the way she is in charge of Pemberley and Darcy. And Casey's looking like, really?
I don't know. I
You
don't
don't
know.
think so?
I mean, no, okay. So if I'm saying at a generation older than Lauren and Kathleen that, oh, you have to work within the system. Hey, I hope that thinking is outdated and that just calling out what's problematic is the move of the moment. I think if I were to look a couple generations older than me, and I think perhaps in the chat, women will tell me if I'm right or not, that there can be kind of an attitude of there's only room for one strong woman. The rest will fail. Only one's let in. So it better be me.
There can be only one.
Yeah. Lady Catherine is
The
like
Highlander feminist.
yeah. That there's perhaps not all women, like not all boomer women. This is not what I'm saying, right? But I watched the struggles that my mother, as a professional and a nurse and in the U.S. military, endured. It's this sense of no, women can't support each other. And I think the way she had to fight through gave my generation a sense of like, oh no, we have a whole whisper network of helping each other and popping the door open. Maybe leads to the next generation. Bang, the door opens for me, and I push anyone out of the way that doesn't let that fit. For me, I don't think that just suggests a kind of growth. There's just too many strikes against Lizzie. The foremost being she's not Lady Catherine's daughter. Yeah, I just
and again, we don't end on Lady Catherine. We end on the Gardeners. So that does kind of imply that.
I love the idea that she comes to look at the gardeners.
Yes.
Not just, she doesn't just come to look at Lizzie.
Like they're the zoo
she comes
animals.
to look at the gardeners.
Yeah.
Because the gardeners are they're the dream, aren't they? I know I was,
and it does suggest that they end on this, that they're the ones who they're closest with, that Elizabeth is rebuilding this entire structure from the ground up in this really democratic way where even the city relatives are invited, and they're actually the honored guests of all of them. Not Lady Catherine, not my esteemed patroness, Lady Catherine de Burgh. Oh no, but
no.
And I guess, go ahead.
Well, there's not an English dream because we're a, nation of mythologists, and we like to think we all came from a race of people that didn't exist. Anglos and Saxons, two different people. But part of what's happening at this point in time that really has been building since the 1750s and comes in hard during the Napoleonic War is the dream of the middle class family. And the Gardeners are that dream. I mean, as I said, it was very uncommon to have that many children and both parents to still be alive. They are doing well enough that not only do they live, yes, not in the fashionable part of town, but in London, and they can afford to leave their children with servants or family. They can afford to go on holiday to Derbyshire. They're not going on holiday abroad. They're not going to France because they physically cannot at this point in time. But I think there's that implication that they probably are well enough off to do that if they had wanted to. They are able to socialize with a family like the Darcys, not just because that's their niece, but because actually they are,
sensible,
educated and sensible and all of these things.
Between different social groups.
And it's that kind of little tap of the nose at the end that, hey, by the way, it's this middle class couple.
Yeah,
this,
who are not only invited, but actually are the reason why any of this worked out in the first
place.
This
merchant couple who everybody kind of looked down on, who are actually the most kind, sensible people in the whole text. They're the reason this love story happened.
Kathleen, read the final little paragraph there. You get to read it today.
Close my book. With the Gardeners, they were always on the most intimate terms. Darcy, as well as Elizabeth, really loved them. And they were both ever sensible of the warmest gratitude towards the persons who, by bringing her to Derbyshire, had been the means of uniting them. Denise.
I mean, Austen really wants to emphasize that, that kind of love and affection of family members and those connections that people make at the end. And it's the gardener. So I'm like, yay, the garden. Like, I mean, I love the garden. I want the gardener's story, but the gardener's story isn't going to be an interesting story because they're just happy. There's a couple
Too
of
lovely. Yeah. No drama.
See, I would be interesting stories. I would just be very happy to watch contented couples go about their daily life talking nonsense.
The gardener's story would be like one of the really wholesome Korean variety shows where it's like, we just watch them go about their daily lives. It would be like the Japanese one where the little kids go to the grocery store for the first time on their own. You would just watch an episode of The Gardeners.
So wholesome.
And you'd be like, oh, yeah.
They're so great. Did you see them on the streets? Oh, yeah. But, or it's just like life in the bake-off tent. Just perpetual.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm fascinated by the fact that it's, I call this episode Intimate Terms because it seems like it's going to be about, if I said intimate terms, it might be about Elizabeth and Darcy, which we've seen, like they have those, but it's about the Gardeners that they have the intimate terms with at the end of this novel, and which is the signal that is the happy marriage that you can have with even lots of children
and the chosen family,
because thank God Aunt Gardner didn't die having one of them.
Well, at the end of the day, this novel is called Pride and Prejudice, and the Gardeners are prejudiced throughout this entire novel, as in prejudiced against. Everybody is kind of like the Bennet, like Mrs. Bennet is like, oh, my brother's boring. The more, upper class, so to speak, the socialites of the novel look down on them. Lady Catherine looks down on them, but they have no pride in terms of they are not prideful. What they take pride in is very meaningful. So it's almost kind of like she's still doing that thing that writers like Radcliffe did, where they ended on this paragraph where it was like, and that which was right was restored to order, and it would all be in capital letters, like randomly all in capital letters, or like Bernie, Pride and Prejudice was taken from a Bernie novel. So she's still doing that thing that those earlier writers did, where they ended on these big dramatic, this is the core of this text, don't forget the moral message. That's exactly what she's doing here, but it's so much more subtle. It's so much sweeter.
It's a very subtle way of doing it.
Yeah, it's the exact same literary technique done in such a restrained, subtle, but earnest and genuine and kind of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink. If you get it, you get it kind of way.
Yes. Well, that is the way it ends. Let's leave it with the Gardeners, because I want to ask you guys some other things. And that way we have to do some would you rathers today. But I also want to hit a couple other things. And one of them is just asking you offhand if there are, whether in this reread, as we've done, the four of us at least, some of the people watching the show, this is their first time reading, and they will have these great discovery moments as they go on and reread the novel over and over, because that happens. Was there any moment of discovery in this novel, on this read, that took you by surprise? Who wants to go first? Casey's nodding, so Casey.
Well, I won't go into that. My reread is a lot more sympathetic to Mrs. Bennet, because you can review our early chapters of me being like, she's the only one who cares. I'd say for me, one of the really powerful reflections, I think, which I've also said, is the extent to which my obsession with the 95 BBC miniseries made me see Bingley in particular through the lens, that cinematic lens. And the guy on the page is actually makes a lot more sense to be friends with Darcy than in any adaptation, frankly. That he's witty, he's more present, he's self-effacing, he's cleverer in conversation, where we get various versions of puppyhood in, in the most recent film and in the miniseries, where he's really played to comic effect. And I get that, but he's more. And I appreciated his marriage more, his friendship more, his involvement more, the forgiveness of him more. It's all deeper than I remembered.
Your most recent film is 17 years old now, so I know.
No, it's not. I reject that narrative.
There needs to be another Pride and Prejudice movie.
Yes, if anyone
I know.
would like
I keep
to hire
hearing
me
things that
as
it's
the
being made
consultant.
and they're doing it, but they really do need to do another one.
Yeah.
I will direct.
Yes, let's do it together.
That's great.
Crowdfund this. Come on.
Crowdfund.
Hey, we'll get a link. I'll put my Venmo in the chat.
We'll
get it on
definitely
Kickstarter.
volunteer to consult. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
No,
And if you have a beard part, but you don't, because there's no beards in the Regency. Fun. Kathleen or
You can-
Lauren, who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go.
You
To be
go.
brief, I'll go briefly because there are many things that I rediscovered on the rereading, but I think the thing that stands out to me now, because the last time I read it, I really was a lot young. I mean, I had to have been early 20s, if not late teen. Like it's been a while since I've sat down and read it all the way through, with the mind towards really close reading, annotating. Like, I think I've reread it just sort of as a casual kind of beach read thing. But now that I'm in, now that's a bit later, and I've had more relationships, I've had more, life experiences. I think the thing that kind of surprised me about this reread were actually the proposal scenes, which was hilarious, because of all the scenes, those are probably the ones that are done the most. But they felt a lot more raw this time around. I think there was something about the Collins one. I always it's funny, but it's also kind of, again, very psychically damaging, I guess, on a certain level. And especially the scene between Darcy and Elizabeth, the proposal scene, which, again, I because I know there's going to be a happy ending, I think I always just read the romantic parts and didn't see how badly they were hurting each other. And now that I'm older, I think I can process a little bit more how kind of hard and difficult, and she does not shy away from really brutalizing her characters to a certain extent. I think that was the thing that surprised me, was rereading the scene, and actually we worked together on that scene for this, and just being aware of how really kind of cruel they almost are to each other, and harsh, and that there is that air of more of a threat from Collins, and the comparison between those two bits. So the proposal scenes seemed a lot less romantic and a lot more complex, and that was the thing that surprised me. I mean, every time I read a text, and every time I close to read a text, I find stuff that I haven't seen before. And I love that we drew out the gardeners a lot. I love that we talked more about Lydia, and there's just so much stuff to love about this book. But I think reading it at this age, it's true what they say, you can read the same books at different times in your life.
Yeah.
And it's completely different. I think reading at that age, the proposal scenes and the gender politics of that, the sexual politics of that, and the undercurrent of brutality sometimes that Austen is capable of, was a surprise to me.
Good. Lauren?
We always do this at the end, and I remember when we started thinking, I don't think I'm going to have anything to say this time, because I have read this novel so many times for so many different reasons. I've read it for fun, I read it for work, I read it to cross-check biographical things, I've read it to create exhibition boards and pick out quotes to go on stupid mugs, and the most recent time I read it was for my thesis. And all through my research career, even though I've have my research focus, I've always been doing Jane Austen stuff. Like, I've always been doing stuff for the festival, I've always been working doing bits and bobs in the magazine or running masterclasses. And I really thought P&P is the one I know the best because it was, you know, it's the most popular one. So when you were working in the Austen tourism industry, that's the one everyone wanted things based on. So that was the one you would read. So, I mean, God, we used to have to come up with witty things to sell teddy bears with Jane Austen Centre ribbons on. So you'd be, trying to think of something to base a line on and things like that. I really thought I wouldn't have anything this time, because when I reread it for the thesis, I had this big realization about how crappy the militia is, which I'd always sort of known in the background, but, really, particularly the Colonel Forster character. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to have another revelation about this novel. Like, well, I probably read it for the first time at 13. I'm 33 now. I was like, there's no way. How many times have I read this book? But actually, reading it again this time, partially, yeah, I think, like Kathleen said, how much they hurt each other. Not just their individual growth and pride and, pridefulness and their prejudice and their preconceptions, but how much they actively try to, Lizzie in particular tries to hurt him. Mm-hmm. And he tries to kind of, not necessarily hurt her back, but play the same game and fails. And I think that stood out. I've always been conscious of that, but I think I really understood it more this time. But I think the big thing was, I think I said this a few episodes ago, that Wickham is not as smart as he thinks he is. And actually, he's so good at pretending to be smart and pretending to be, or thinking. I don't think he's pretending. I think it's that he believes his own, he's drunk his own Kool-Aid. He thinks that he is smarter than everybody else. And I, as a reader, bought into it too. Like, I've always been like, oh, he's obviously the bad guy and I'm smart because I figured that out. But then actually rereading it this time, I was like, honestly, I do think partially it's because of Glass Onion and that whole narrative, but also maybe because of the time that I've been reading.
Genius.
Yeah, and maybe it is because we're at a time.
Dumb.
Yeah, like maybe it is because we're at a point in pop culture and social culture where we're like, oh, these people are not as smart as we thought they were, and we've bought into this. We've accepted their behavior because we thought they were intelligent, and that's very much kind of what happens with Wickham. You're like,
the next paper should be
we're close reading Glass Onion and Mr. Wickham. But yeah, I think that's what really stood out for me this time, is that he's not this master manipulator. Like, he's not as charming and as smart as he thinks he is. And he maybe wouldn't have gotten away with it if things had been slightly different, or if this novel took place 10 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wickham crypto bro, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. He's the kind of guy that's like, oh, I'm building an app. And you're like, okay,
I don't have the app
everyone's
yet.
like, oh wow, okay. And then it
buy
turns out,
my NFT.
Yeah. Like, and I guess that's the thing, like, oh man, I didn't know that would be something that's still so timeless about this novel, that Mr. Wickham is a crypto bro. But yeah, that really shocked me this read round. I was like, oh, I have been taken in by this. Yeah. He's not actually that intelligent, is he?
All right. Well, I have a couple other things to hit. Well, let's, I know we're going long today, and I'm just going long on this episode. Sorry, Lauren, you're gonna have to stay up, but at least you're an hour earlier.
I'm an hour early, so it's fine. You can see that I've got slightly more color than I usually have by this point of the show.
But I wanted to, and is that a new haircut, which I love?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I know as soon as you came on, I was going to mention them, like, then we had other things to say, and I didn't say it earlier on. So well done.
Thank you.
We let's get to a couple would you rather's. I have like a list here of would you rather's, but I'll do one, and then if you guys each have one, you'll do one too. And I'm trying to think of the easiest or the best one I should go with. Would you rather? All right, would you, especially because I talked about this already with my wife Kate and with Lulu, would you rather, and you have to pick, marry Mr. Collins or Mr. Wickham?
Yes, going off to spinsterhood, apparently not an option here.
Not an option. You got to marry one of them.
See, I
Oh.
would pick Wickham
Yeah.
because Kathleen's played Kiss, Marry, and Kill with me, so I think this is not going to
Yeah.
shock her at all.
No,
Because
it's not.
when we play Kiss, Marry, Kill, I'm always it always ends in murder. So
Yeah.
I'm always like, listen, what I would do, right?
Is marry
I
the
would-
guy and then kill him.
What? So I'd marry him. He's a soldier. I'd be like, hey, why don't you join the regulars? Ship him off to France.
Lauren's a
Good.
Black Widow.
Good. There you go.
I would, because then I'll get his soldier's pension.
That is a
And
great
I
strategy.
could be a governess or write a novel or to go back to my family. It'll be fine.
He's like a cockroach, though, right? Like Wickham will
Yeah.
never die. He'll never die.
Yeah.
KC, who would you pick
I
then?
gotta go Collins.
Yeah.
Look, I'm just very aware that I am the theater artist in the group, and boy, I have a love match, but it didn't always look like that was going to be a thing I got to do. I went into theater for a living. Yeah, no,
As two English majors, yeah, we can.
Yeah,
sympathize here.
we're academics.
I
We
know.
can't
Yeah.
talk.
yeah, no, I think that Charlotte has carved out a kind of happiness.
Yes,
I will
do
say
agree.
though, of the
I think that too. Yeah.
yeah, and that's not possible for Lydia and Wickham. It's just not possible. And I will at least say that of the Pride and Prejudice variations, in the world of Jane Austen fanfic, one of my favorites is the one where like Collins falls off a horse 5 years in and dies, and then Charlotte gets her love match.
Falls off a horse.
See,
Charlotte
that's what
again.
Wickham
Like
would be
Lauren playing the long.
lost in battle.
Yeah.
If-
So you're
if
both
we're
running the
killing our
same
husbands,
scam.
then all
You're
bets
both
are off
hoping
here.
that he will die. There you go.
Yeah.
Kathleen?
This is probably good. It's the last episode because I feel like I'm gonna reveal more about myself at this point than
That's what
than
Would You
I
Rather's
should.
about.
Look,
Is this
I
gonna shake our
understand
friendship?
the correct answer is Mr. Collins, but
But it's gonna die, so I'm fine.
but here's here's why I personally, I guess I'm more Lydia than Charlotte. The correct answer is Mr. Collins. The sensible answer is Mr. Collins. However, there are versions of Wickham that I would do horrible things to be married to. I'm thinking of the Death Comes to Pemberley version where it's Matthew Good. I'd accept a lot of grief
Mhm.
if I got to marry
The
Matthew
Lost in
Good.
Austen version as well. He turns out to be a good guy and he's hot.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, Matthew
I
Good.
mean, so I think I'm revealing a deep weakness in moral character here, which
this
is
is nothing
it
that
depends-
I did not know about you, but probably that other people didn't.
Yeah. I understand that. I agree on paper. It has to be Mr. Collins. That's just sensible. It's stable. You could manage him very well. You could put him very easily
And
into
then
some sort of court.
you'd
You would have your own space. So that's all.
You'd
I get
eventually
all
get
that.
one.
But Matthew Good,
No, you're right. I'm wrong. That's a deeper thought than I had, and I'm
like a
grateful for it.
tree.
Well, to be fair, I
Yeah.
was completely shallow and I was like, he's hot. And then eventually I could get rid of him.
Yes, yeah. No, I
Please
quite
do
like
love
the kill him off when he gets to be too much trouble, but so
Mm.
yeah, that's my
Alrighty.
reasoning.
Do any of you have a would you rather?
I have one.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Would you rather have to spend 3 weeks at Rosings with Lady Catherine or take a 3-week tour of the country with Mr. Collins?
Oh, that's easy. No. I would practice my piano forte for the entirety of my time at Rosings because I would be in no one's way in that part of the house.
Yeah. So this is my thinking, because if the Rosings option, you only have to have dinner with her.
Yeah.
The Collins option, you get to see lots of stuff, but you have to be with him the whole time.
Yeah.
On the other hand, what are men to compare to rocks and mountains? I mean,
Yeah, I wouldn't
Let's
do
do
the
it.
I wouldn't do the tour with Colin. Especially because I'm gonna eat and drink well at Rosings. So I'm like one of mine was tea with
Oh,
Lady
you know that's-
Catherine or Carolyn Bingley, and I'm
That
kind of
food is
like,
bland.
well, like I'm gonna be fine with at least
Yeah.
the what I get to consume there.
if there are pastries, I'm there. Yeah. And plus, I mean, again, since we're knocking off husbands here, I think the temptation to push Collins off the mountain
Yeah.
would
Also,
maybe
to
be
be
too
fair,
strong. This
if
is
you're
a
at
setup.
Rosings,
I
if you're at
could not
Rosings,
spend that kind of quality time, quantitative
Collins.
time
Yeah.
with Mr.
Yeah.
Collins, like every day.
yeah.
Might have to develop a permanent headache and just
Yeah.
stick to Rosings. Yeah.
Also, if you're at
Rosings.
Rosings, you might bump into Colonel Fitzwilliam,
Do like,
the underappreciated beau of this novel.
yes.
Kathleen,
have
do you
I-
have one? Go ahead.
Have I said-
I don't.
Have I said on the broadcast that I have run into the real life Colonel Fitzwilliam? I had a chat once backstage with Anthony Caff, the 95 P&P Colonel Fitzwilliam, because he came to Broadway and did Charles III that a friend of mine was in. We had a chat.
God,
A
Fuck on
that's
that.
amazing.
chat.
That's so good. I just stared at Rosamund Pike. Gosh,
Yeah.
that was my interaction. I just stood there going,
Well, no, I mean, she's maybe the most beautiful.
she
human
was
on the planet.
ethereal. She was the
Yeah.
most beautiful person I've ever seen in my entire life. I just stood there and was like, and then she said thank you, and I was like,
I have one, and
Go ahead.
I think it's for the chat. I think it's for tonight's listener participants, because I'm talking to 3 people who read books for a living. So this is probably not for you. Would you rather get to read only Pride and Prejudice for the rest of your life, or never get to read it ever again?
Oh.
oh,
Sorry.
controversial.
Only
I've read
read
it
Pride
so
and
many
Prejudice of the
times.
Austen novels?
I
Yeah,
don't-
no, that's yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Just
Okay.
Pride and Prejudice.
Of the Austen novels. So I could read. I
No,
can't
no,
read
no, no, only.
I read
That's
anything
why I know
else.
it's not for
That's
y'all. who
easy
read
because
it.
there's so many other books to read. Like, yes, I would, but I've read it. So
I've read it enough times. I think
I've
if I
read it.
hadn't read it as many times as I had, it would be genuine. I would genuinely struggle. But if
Yeah.
you also told me I could only read one book for the rest of my life, like if you put a gun to my head and said, pick a book, P&P would be up there. That would,
Yes,
it
yeah.
would be one of my desert islands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I reread it every year. I reread it every time I get sick. Like,
you know,
Yeah. That's a tough. I mean, yeah. As I could recite the dialogue, but I think I would really be psychically damaged if I couldn't ever read it again. Like that's it's a massive. It's
it would
up
be
there.
like
It's
giving a
definitely
piece.
up there.
Yeah, I would sacrifice it, but it would be like, in fantasy films where they have to give like a little bit of their heart or a memory of their most loved person. That would be me giving up P&P.
Yeah.
I have some more of these that I'll post in our Facebook group that people can answer. and
Yay,
we
good
can
idea.
do. 25 of our listeners and others who follow the Rosenbach will be taking an Emma course with Juliet Wells, which will be quite extraordinary. If you have not registered for that course and want to, I don't imagine you can go without outside of now and register for it, because there's 20 people in it now and there's only 5 spots left, and it's definitely going to fill up. So if you want that experience, which is going to be absolutely fabulous, that you're all on the screen, it's more like a Zoom meeting where you're all there having this great discussion about Emma, led by Juliet Wells from Goucher College, who's brilliant. That will be the next thing that a few of us get to do with Austen. But I wanted to ask each of you for a recommendation for the audience for what do you read next? Somebody asked that today on the Facebook group. Which Austen book do I read next? But it could also be Austen related that you could recommend as well. So who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go. I mean, Persuasion's my favorite. I'll never not say Persuasion, but I also do love very much Northanger Abbey.
Mhm.
I think of all her novels, that one's probably the most underrated. That's the one everyone seems to forget. That's the one, but I do love that. But Persuasion's the Austen novel where, again, if I could never reread it, it would kill me because that for me that still ranks a little bit higher than Pride and Prejudice. also, if you want something that's completely different, but I thought was a very interesting contrast, I've just started rereading Dangerous Liaisons, which is taking the completely different track in a sense, because I mean it's a solid 30 years earlier. It's bored French aristocrats having affairs, but it's interesting to see from a comparison.
That's an epistolary novel, right?
Yes, yeah, this is, again, you can see where Austen's getting a lot of what she, the epistolary novel form, and how you build a narrative through different perspectives, through letters, and that there is still this element of manners and the social exchange and secrets and what you say and what you don't and what you hide. That it's very, on the surface could not be more different, but as if you're looking for something that's just a little bit trashy, but you can see a lot. If you liked Austen, then I would give that a shot as well, because I'm almost finished rereading it, and it's been very enjoyable to kind of have the seedy underside version. Yeah.
There were actually, when Casey, to your question earlier about never read or only read that, we had 3 responses come in quickly. Actually, that Iman says that never get to read it again. The memory will live on. Erin said never read again because I could read books that quote it.
True.
And Beth said, if I could only read one book for the rest of my life, it is Pride and Prejudice. Just told my husband that tonight. So, and Rebecca said, I would give up P&P and read the other 5 continuously and feel trapped. There you go.
Good call.
All righty. So Kathleen, you said Persuasion, but also Dangerous Liaisons. Great choice.
Yeah.
Lauren?
I kind of came up with 3 because I was like, okay, well, what do I do? So I've got if you want more Austen, if you want something Austen but silly, and if you want something in the similar vein. So my if you want more Austen recommendation is read Lady Susan. It's a novella, it's epistolary, so it's written in letters. It is so funny, and it's so bawdy, and you can really see some people kind of say, why did she kind of tone it down? You can see how she develops that subtlety, and I think it makes her wit even more. She's about 19 when she writes it. It's a delightful little novella. It's so much fun. I highly recommend it if you want to read, if particularly after P&P. I think if you've had your Austen kind of kick started, go and read Lady Susan now before you read any of the others.
Austen, that's it.
Yes, yeah. Because as I've said many times before, Northanger is my favorite, and I do think, like Kathleen said, it's underappreciated, but Lady Susan is so brilliant. So that is my Austen recommendation. My something Austen-like but a bit silly recommendation is Austenland. I know I've mentioned this film before. It's such a good film. I absolutely love it. Also, it's got JJ Field, who plays Henry Tilney, and it's got
Jennifer Coolidge, my wife's favorite, is in that too, which was really fun.
Yeah, it's got Brett from Flight of the Conchords. It's so funny. It's so spot on. It gets the Austen mania humor and the tongue in cheek, but it's not derogatory.
They don't always get that, but that one,
it's so spot on in the tone, and it's so funny and so sweet. And
it's a good book too by Shannon Hale.
Yeah, it's a really great kind of recreation of Austen through Austen fandom. And then my final thing of, if you want something Austen inspired but a bit different, I would like to recommend you read Charlotte Smith's The Old Manor House.
I love that book.
So Charlotte Smith was one of the most prolific writers of the late 18th century, almost certainly a massive influence on Austen. And this novel was written in the 1790s, but set during the American Revolution. And it features a character called Mrs. Reynolds, who I am almost certain was part of the inspiration for Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She is this like widowed, prissy, snobby lady
nightmare
who dictates and punishes her relations for things that she thinks they have done wrong. And she's very hypocritical. She's hysterical and ridiculous. Smith is a little bit more severe in terms of like, it's a very, in some ways, a very tragic narrative. The war sections of the novel where the protagonist goes and fights in the American Revolutionary War is quite evocative. But
it's a bit of a novelty novel because it's one of the few that
Yeah.
mentions the American Revolution at
Yeah.
all at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought particularly for you guys as like our Rosenbach audience, that might be one you don't know of, but might be of interest because it's a British writer writing about the American Revolutionary War from that British perspective. It's very staunchly anti-war. It was written in the run-up to the French Revolution, and Smith was arguably, it's very gothic.
Yeah.
And Smith was also a poet. She intersperses poetry through it, which is very much early Romanticism. And it's just a really wonderful novel, oft forgotten. And Charlotte Smith, was certainly a massive influence on Jane Austen. So they're my 3 recommendations.
Great recommendations. KC, where do people go to next?
They're all plugs. If you're looking for something, these for readers all, I am part of a team of co-writers. I'm also the director of a world premiere adaptation of Jane Eyre that's happening in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Artists Collective, and it opens on May 13th and runs for 3 weeks. Just finished the rehearsal draft of the script, and I'm excited of the sort of the joy, the slight irreverence where there's room for it in Bronte, and the integrity with which we approach that.
We have an audience to watch Sundays with Jane Eyre, so I'm hoping they will come out to see that. I certainly will.
Yeah. The reason, and I won't go into too much detail, but the reason it's a world premiere adaptation is I read a bunch of adaptations to choose one to direct, and most of them began at Thornfield with the love story. And yeah, I get that it's an epic novel, but also for me, Helen Burns is maybe the greatest love story of the novel. And so our conceit is a world in which all the influential women in Jane Eyre's life, good and ill, from Aunt Reed and Bessie at her childhood home to Helen Burns, all become kind of a chorus of the voices that have influenced Jane and the voices in her head. And it's the way that the writing team takes their interiority of that novel and explodes it into theatrical space. So there are arguments of 5 Jane Eyres about, what to do in this moment for every moment. After that, book lovers everywhere, my theater company, Tiny Dynamite, in June, is doing the world premiere of a beautiful play set in a bookstore by the Japanese-American playwright Julia Izumi. It is called Meet Murasaki Shikibu and Book Signing and Other Things. And it starts out as a book talk with the author, Murasaki Shikibu, who, if you've heard that name, it's because she wrote arguably the first novel in history. So what a get, because she's 1,000 years old. This bookstore has gotten her for a talk book, and it's a little interactive. It explodes into places like absurdist and humorous and beautiful. And finally, for a Jane Austen fix, I can't announce it yet because they haven't announced their season, but a company in the great state of Connecticut is going to be doing a production of the complete works of Jane Austen abridged. And so I will be directing that for them in Connecticut. I don't know, do a Google alert on the title in October in Connecticut.
All right. Well, you'll also, we'll post that stuff on our Facebook group too.
Yeah. Can I just take a moment to say how much pleasure the Facebook group has brought me, like just a deeply felt and wonderfully argumentative and silly group. I will continue to follow it and post. It has been just a great joy of this year for me.
That's really great. Yeah, I mean, I really love it. So for me, I think I'll probably go to Northanger Abbey next for Austen, if only because it is the one that like as I read, I tend to that's the one it's been the longest since I've read. So I want to go back to that. So I read all of them Like there's always one of them that kind of hits, and that'll be the one that I go back to next, because I haven't read it in so long. And that was my Austen discovery, was Northanger Abbey. That was the first novel that that I had a professor in college say, well, we had that in a course, in an English novel course, and told me that it was funny. And I was like, really? And actually, I had already seen that movie of that with Joseph Firth, not related to Colin, and I had seen that old movie of it. I don't know if it was a TV movie or a feature film. It was a TV movie, but it had feature film production, so it was all outdoor and it wasn't one of those.
It's actually in the baths. It's one of the only adaptations to go into the baths.
And it's not the greatest adaptation of that novel, but it was before I had read it, and they add all kinds of more gothic to it, and they add comic scenes with Hugh, I can't remember the actor who played the Squire in the Tom Jones film, shows up at one point. But it's funny and gothic, and I really loved it. But reading the novel turned me on, because I had been turned off by the experiences I had with Austen in school, and I also didn't understand that she was actually funny until this professor pointed it out to me, and I read that, and that was a novel that I loved. So I'm looking forward to going back to that and reading that. But I'm also looking forward to reading this Murder of Mr. Wickham novel, which is fairly new, by Claudia Gray, and it is because it is. Mr. Knightley and Emma have a house party, and they invite all the people from all the other novels to the party too. And obviously Wickham is murdered, and they have to, and it's a murder mystery. And I think all the Austen characters in a novel, I want to read that. So that's the kind of fan fiction that I like to do. So that's what I'll be reading next, Austen related. We also have courses at the Rosenbach, everyone. There's an Emily Dickinson course in the garden, which we are going to have. You will actually meet and have the class in the renovated garden behind the Rosenbach. And that's an in-person course. But we also have online courses too. There's an Emma course, which is almost filled up. There's a Proust course on Swan's Way. And it's already, there's great registration for it. So we're going to continue. After this one for Swan's Way, we'll go on to the other, what are the 37 volumes of Remembrance of Things Past, and we'll do each one, as long as people sign up for them. There's a course on Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. And what I am most excited for is a course called Gothic Transformations, which Lauren and her Ghoul Guide compatriot going, that everybody knows from past shows, Biblioventures that we've done, will teach. Lauren, what are the three authors we're doing in that course?
We are doing, oh God, I've got to get this right now, because we cut one and I can't, I'm like, what did we do? We're doing Mary Shelley. Short stories though. We're doing Mary Shelley's short stories. So we're going to do Transformations. We're doing Robert Louis Stevenson, and I can't remember which one we decided. You're doing H.G. Wells's Island of Dr. H.G. Wells's, yes. That's the one that I insisted on, so I should have known that. Good. But we had to cut Le Fanu, which I was a bit sad about, because I love green tea, but so excited to teach Island of Dr. Moreau, because it is one of those texts that I think is not understudied, because it's such a popular text, but we don't always look at it through a Gothic lens, and it's so creepy, and it's so global, and it's so bizarre. And last year, Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who wrote Mexican Gothic, published a reimagining of it called The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, which I absolutely devoured and loved. But also then when I went back and reread the Wells novella, I saw even more in it. So I think it'll be a really exciting course, and the book really I love. I taught many times myself, and the movie. Yeah, we're gonna dig into the weirdness that is the 19th century Gothic. So I'm excited, because I don't get to go there very often. That will be great. We also have Pickwick Monthly and Sherlock Mondays coming up, and all of that. But plenty of things for you guys to engage in with the Rosenbach, with on your own reading, or going to see KC shows, which you'll run into me there, because I'm not going to miss those.
I want to thank all the guests who have taken a turn about the room with us, and I won't run down the whole list. I mean, we started with Devaney Loser, and then we finished with Claudia Johnson, but everybody in between too. I am deeply appreciative of your time in sharing your love and knowledge of Austen with us. I know the audience loved all that too. And every show ends with my final thoughts, and I'm always, it's always a little tough to say goodbye all of this, but Janites, thank you all for tuning in today. I'm so grateful for the audience that has watched this show. I mean, one of the things we try to do at the Rosenbach is bring communities of readers together, and from the live chat on this program, which is so wonderful, and you guys are so validating towards each other and ask questions and engage with each other. But from the live chat, from the emails I've received from some of you, I mean, I get emails every week too. It appears that Austen Mondays has been a place where we can all come together, viewers, special guests, co-hosts too, from all over the world. Lauren joining us from England, to talk, teach, learn, share our love of Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice. This is a novel I really never tire of reading, and now I'm thinking of it more, Casey. I don't know if I can give this, but I mean, that's really tough. Like other great works of literature, I always find something in it that I haven't thought about before or is different to me because I'm not the same person I was the last time I read it. And that new perspective also creates the effect that the characters are actually changing too, like the Mr. Bennet on my first reading is not the Mr. Bennet on this reading. Lizzie and Darcy are not the same couple as the first time I watched them fall in love. Maybe Mr. Collins is still the same to me, but that's Charlotte's problem, not mine. So I want to thank Jane Austen too. I can appreciate the craft of her works. I can be amazed at the intricacies and how she creates, how she uses words to build that narrative. But I really want to thank her for creating this world in Pride and Prejudice especially, that we get to walk around in, that we get to explore and meet these characters who become like real people in our minds. That terrible pang of regret I feel when Elizabeth thinks that she's never going to get to see Darcy again. And then that same thrill of joy when they do reunite. I mean, those emotions are real in me, as I am sure they are in all of you who read it as well. And that's the nexus of these shows, that sharing our reading experiences with each other. And now there's one more Janite community in this world, this Janite community that was created around this show. Hopefully one that can continue to bring readers together, because these episodes will live on the internet. So thank all of you for going on this biblioventure with me. Thank you for creating this community on Austen Mondays. And onward to the next rereading of Pride and Prejudice in your life, or the next Austen book, or the next Austen show, or the next biblioventures with Pickwick Monthly and Sherlock Mondays. Onward. Thank you.
And thank you, Ed, for leading us through another biblioventure.
Yes, thank you very much. This was so much. This was great.
You guys, it's so great. Every week I send everybody on the notice. I send a thank you note, a little thank you email to the co-hosts after every show, and just so you don't get a big head and think you're special, but it's true. Every time one of you is on, I think like, oh my God, I want to do every show with you, because you all bring that great energy and passion to this that I just absolutely love. So thank you, three of you.
Thanks. It's worth staying up till 20 past 1 in the morning.
Well, we did 20 past 2 if we hadn't moved to daylight savings. So there you go.
I know. Yeah.
I also want to thank our show sponsor, Lisa Washington. Lisa Washington is a great supporter of programs at the Rosenbach, and she supports other shows. She's also sponsoring Sherlock Mondays, and she helps enable me to do these shows. And I've gotten to know Lisa over the years. She takes courses at the Rosenbach, and it's really great to have a sponsor who is very involved in the programs that we do and is willing to sponsor that stuff. I want to thank all of you who have donated or joined as members over the last week. Even your support helps us bring this show to everyone, create other one-of-a-kind programs and courses, and helps us care for the collections at the Rosenbach as well. And this week I want to thank Rebecca R. and Sylvia H., both from Philadelphia, who made additional donations with their raffle tickets. So thanks, both of you. And some of you have even joined as members. Carol T. from Telford, PA, Kate K. from Glen Holden, PA, Emanuela V. from Philadelphia, and Andrea B. from Philadelphia. Iman G. from Orlando, Florida became a member, and Richard R. from Brooklyn, New York became a member. Thanks to this audience for watching these episodes week after week. You know, we've had viewers all over the world, and especially all of you in the chat right now watching live. I'd call you out. Some of of you are really active in the chat, and I love that. I mean, I can't call you out because I'm going to miss somebody. And you all deserve my thanks for every, bit of chat, live chat that you left in there. I try to build community with these biblioventures, and I hope I have with this one. Thanks to Brianna, who was our chat, Mrs. Reynolds, for managing our links in the chat. Thanks to Tucker Christine, who wrote our opening and closing credits music. Thanks to Lulu, my daughter, who created the shot and created the credits with me and was on to do the drawings for the raffle. That's it, guys. Another one in the books.
Yeah.
24 episodes of this, and it went so well because of you and because of the audience and because of everybody back scenes on the backstage at the Rosenbach, all the departments and all the staff there who devoted time to this, and it's because of the work that everyone does at the Rosenbach that I get to do these things here with the audience. And so I'm very grateful for the staff for enabling me to be able to connect with people in this way. Readers, I'm Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and farewell until our next biblioventure. Bye-bye, everyone.